the sharp metallic clang that shattered the peaceful afternoon air of Pine Valley wasn't just unexpected, it was a direct insult. In the clear light of day, the HOA had the audacity to send fake cops dressed like dime store deputies to slice through my gate lock and march straight into my cabin as if they held the deed to my bloodline. Watching those imposters trample over the very ground my grandfather had claimed decades ago set my blood on fire. But Miranda, she had no idea the storm she'd just summoned. The woman, drunk on delusions of control, had made a critical mistake. What she didn't know was that I had a very personal surprise waiting inside, one I'd prepared the moment her power plays started to escalate. As the cabin door creaked open and he stepped out into the light, Miranda froze completely. Silent, as if her voice had been stolen by the truth standing before her. Want to guess who it was? And more importantly, how he knew everything, every move before even I did. This wasn't some petty neighborhood scuffle or a misguided act of authority. This was the reckoning the exact second Miranda learned. The brutal cost of trying to claim power that was never hers. But before all hell broke loose, I had been hunched over my grandfather's old workbench, meticulously sanding a thick piece of oak for the cabin's restoration. The gentle rhythm of my hands came to an abrupt stop when the high-pitched grind of metal sliced through the still air, a sound too deliberate, too aggressive for a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I froze, immediately recognizing the sound. Someone was cutting through the heavy-duty lock on my front gate. The same gate my grandfather had fortified 2 decades ago to protect his surveying equipment. My pulse surged as I set the sandpaper aside, crept toward the cabin's front window, and peered out through the dusty glass. What I saw made my stomach drop and my temper ignite in the same breath. 2 men, dressed in what appeared to be official police uniforms, were steadily working on my gate with a pair of bolt cutters, their movements calm, confident, and disturbingly well rehearsed, like this wasn't their first time performing such an act. Right behind them stood a woman I recognized instantly from the neighborhood HOA meetings, Miranda Blackstone, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, who wielded her fabricated sense of authority like a crown forged from arrogance. She was waving her hands dramatically, pointing toward my cabin as if directing a tactical raid, convinced she ruled not just her own property, but mine too. The whole scene unfolded like a bad play, like someone trying to rob your home while wearing Halloween badges and a crooked sense of entitlement. My instincts kicked in and I reached for my phone, doing exactly what my grandfather had drilled into me years ago: document everything. "Ethan," he used to say, "you don't have to be the strongest guy in the room, just the most prepared. And always record everything." Those words rang louder than ever as I remotely activated the hidden security cameras he'd secretly installed across the property, tiny, clever little devices so well hidden even I sometimes forgot where they were. It had been his pet project during the final years of his life, driven by a growing suspicion that someone was tampering with the local land records to undermine his ownership. And now, watching these fake officers trespass and dismantle what he'd built, it struck me that maybe his paranoia was actually quiet foresight. As I zoomed in with my phone's camera, subtle but telling details started popping, things that would have been missed by anyone not paying close attention. From a distance, the uniforms looked legit, but up close, the patches seemed off, the badges slightly askew, and nothing about their gear aligned with the regulations of any real law. Enforcement agency. The handcuffs dangling from their belts looked laughably fake cheap plastic imitations I'd seen hanging on hooks at the dollar store, more suited for a kid's Halloween costume than any serious enforcement. Then one of the so-called officers turned slightly toward the camera, and that's when it hit me. Their badge read police department instead of department. The typo was glaring, ridiculous even, and it confirmed what I'd already suspected. These clowns weren't real cops. They were playing dress-up with props bought from the same place that sells plastic sheriff stars and rubber mustaches. Meanwhile, Miranda was strutting across my lawn like a self-appointed general in some imaginary war, waving her arms and barking orders as if this was a battlefield and not private property. Her shrill voice echoed across the yard, spouting nonsense about building code violations and emergency inspections, supposedly authorized by the HOA. She acted like being president of the homeowner association came with a federal badge and the right to violate constitutional rights. But what really made my stomach tighten was the manila folder clutched in her hand, bulging with what appeared to be official documents, stamped and labeled with what I knew in my gut were forged credentials. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was a fully staged intimidation tactic, a coordinated performance meant to pressure me into surrendering control. But Miranda Blackstone had made a critical miscalculation in her absurd little production. She didn't know that 6 months ago, Chief Rodriguez of the Pine Valley Police Department had sat at my kitchen table and warned me something exactly like this might happen. He told me that other families in the area had already encountered similar schemes, people showing up in fake uniforms, citing bogus HOA mandates, trying to force property owners into giving up land or access. He made it very clear, if anyone showed up flashing questionable badges or pushing suspect documents, I was to contact him directly. What Miranda also didn't know, and what would soon unravel her entire plan, was that Chief Rodriguez had been my grandfather's best friend for over 3 decades, and the two of them had worked side by side on a secret initiative they called Operation Honeypot Quiet, methodical plan designed to catch exactly the kind of fraud Miranda had just walked into headfirst. As Miranda's phony officers finished snapping through the lock and started striding toward my cabin like they had a search warrant signed by God himself, a strange cocktail of rage and anticipation churned in my chest. The fury made sense. They were trespassing on sacred ground, stomping all over my grandfather's legacy with cheap props and inflated egos. But beneath that anger was something far more potent, the thrill of knowing a secret Miranda couldn't begin to guess. I wasn't some defenseless pushover about to be steamrolled by her HOA power fantasy. I was the final move in a strategy my grandfather had been quietly crafting for over 2 years, and she had just walked straight into the trap he'd laid with meticulous care. Every step she took was being recorded from multiple angles. Every word spoken by her and her dollar store deputies was being picked up by the discreet mics wired into the cabin walls. In just under 20 minutes, Chief Rodriguez would be getting a very enlightening call reporting a suspected impersonation of law enforcement officers on Maple Street, no less. But Miranda, with all her smug assurance, didn't know any of that. She didn't know that I'd already triggered my grandfather's hidden surveillance system, or that someone very significant was already en route to join our little show. When she and her costume-clad goons burst through the cabin door, It was less like a property check and more like a low-budget TV raid, comically dramatic and completely disconnected from reality. Miranda stormed in like she was about to take down an international crime syndicate instead of walking into the humble workspace of a woodworker. Honoring his family's roots, her eyes scanned my grandfather's carefully maintained tools and in-progress restorations with a sneer, like craftsmanship was beneath her self-appointed authority. Her two fake officers stood stiff on either side of her, trying to look imposing but giving off more middle school theater than military precision. From my vantage point in the kitchen doorway, I watched her theatrics unfold as she pulled out that swollen manila folder, flipping through it like she was following orders from a sacred bureaucratic text. It was all so exaggerated, so earnestly absurd, that I nearly laughed aloud at her dedication to the role, but I held it in. Instead of confronting them outright, I followed my grandfather's playbook to the letter, activating the concealed audio recording devices he'd wired into the cabin's beams years ago and meticulously documenting every detail as the charade unfolded. He'd always been borderline obsessed with record keeping, a habit I used to tease him for until now. This wasn't just random harassment. This was an organized operation, polished and rehearsed like they'd done it before and knew exactly how to execute. Miranda strutted through the cabin like a field general, barking commands at her fake officers with unnerving confidence, instructing them to search specific corners and compartments with an eerie familiarity that suggested prior knowledge. Either she had been planning this stunt for weeks or she'd pulled the same move on other unsuspecting homeowners. Either way, the implications made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay composed and keep the cameras rolling. And then came the golden moment, the kind of blunder that unravels an entire scheme. Jake Miller, the taller of the two impersonators, was hovering near my grandfather's prized surveying equipment, pretending to inspect it like he had the faintest idea what it was. That's when his phone buzzed loudly with an incoming FaceTime call. Clearly rattled, he fumbled to silence it and instead accidentally accepted it, his screen lighting up with the words, "FaceTime from Ethan Carter." The irony was almost poetic. The man illegally snooping through my belongings had just butt-dialed the person whose rights he was trampling. I answered from my hidden position, and in an instant, Jake's panicked face filled my screen while mine appeared on his, locking us into what had to be the most awkward, incriminating video call in amateur criminal history. His eyes went wide, stammering as reality slammed into him like a brick wall. And right there, in crystal clear letters above his image, it read, Jake Miller, Riverside Community Theater. The badge, the uniform, the whole performance, it all made sense now. He wasn't a cop. He was an actor. Miranda caught a glimpse of Jake's accidental video call and absolutely lost it, her face twisted with fury as she shrieked at him to shut that damn thing off, all while desperately trying to keep her mask of control intact. But the slip-up had already exposed more than just Jake's face. It had revealed a critical piece of the puzzle. In the chaos of his fumbling, Jake had unknowingly left his phone unlocked, and for a brief, golden moment, I could clearly see a folder labeled Secure Jobs sitting in his app drawer. The name didn't mean much at the time, but I snapped a quick screenshot from my screen, knowing instinctively that it was going to matter later. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole, especially as Miranda turned on him with a venomous whisper about professional standards and sticking to the script, as if this entire fiasco was just another amateur stage play gone off the rails. But her fury evaporated in an instant when something else caught her attention, a metallic glint tucked behind a stack of lumber in the far corner of the cabin. Her expression shifted from rage to gleeful fixation as she laid eyes on my grandfather's old steel safe, partially hidden behind the wood I'd set aside for future cabinet doors. Her eyes lit up like a prospector discovering gold, and she darted toward it with a greed that couldn't be hidden. Her entire demeanor changed no longer. Pretending to care about fake inspections or housing violations, she was laser-focused on the safe. Her two costumed cronies followed close behind, and she began spouting nonsense about undocumented assets and potential tax evasion, tossing out legal jargon that sounded weighty but was completely irrelevant to a simple home inspection. The act was over. This wasn't about community safety or some HOA regulation. It was about whatever my grandfather had locked away in that old metal box. That safe wasn't just a curiosity to her, it was the prize. Miranda's tone turned sharp, almost manic, as she ordered me to open it immediately, waving her manila folder like it carried federal authority, threatening me with bogus penalties and seizure of property if I refused. But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about the law. It was about greed, legacy, and a desperate attempt to grab something that was never meant to be hers. Her fake cops tried their best to back her up, parroting half-baked legal jargon like they'd memorized it 5 minutes before curtain call, but their performance was unraveling fast. Jake, still rattled from his FaceTime fiasco, kept stumbling over basic terms. He mispronounced property as poverty and confidently cited statute number 17B as the reason I was legally obligated to open all locked containers, which sounded more like a cartoon villain's rulebook than actual legislation. His partner was even worse, visibly reading off notes scribbled on his palm while fumbling to recall Miranda's pre-rehearsed lines. The entire charade was spiraling into slapstick absurdity, teetering on the edge of collapse, and that's when I knew the real show was just beginning. While Miranda ranted about legal authority she didn't have, and Jake tried to recover from his downward spiral, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for, the heavy slam of a car door out in the driveway. Perfect timing, exactly as my grandfather and Chief Rodriguez had orchestrated months before. Miranda, too obsessed with the safe and whatever she imagined was inside it, didn't even notice the approaching footsteps. But I saw it through the cabin window. Our guest of honor had arrived, and everything was about to change. Miranda still believed she was the one in control, unaware that her intimidation stunt was moments away from turning into the best piece of evidence Rodriguez had ever collected in his long, methodical career. When Chief Rodriguez stepped through the doorway, the entire atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. Gone was the chaotic amateur theater. In its place stood a man whose very presence commanded silence. With the calm, steady composure of someone who'd spent 3 decades dealing with small-town schemes and serious crimes alike, he surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. He didn't have to raise his voice, didn't need a grand entrance. He simply stood there, and the weight of real authority pushed every ounce of nonsense out of the air. While Miranda's control came from loud words and empty threats, Rodriguez's came from experience, from having stared down liars, frauds, and bullies, and never blinking once, Miranda's entire face lit up with visible relief the second she spotted Chief Rodriguez's uniform, clearly assuming her little act had been so convincing that real law enforcement had shown up to back her bogus inspection. Practically bouncing with self-satisfaction, she launched into a breathless explanation, gushing about how grateful she was that someone in uniform was finally taking serious action against so-called HOA violations. The irony was glorious here. She was confessing to an orchestrated fraud in front of the one man in Pine Valley who could arrest her on the spot, and she didn't even realize it. What unfolded next was better than any comedy show I'd ever seen. Chief Rodriguez stood quietly, listening with practiced patience as Miranda rattled off a monologue filled with legal buzzwords, building codes, and emergency authority, all while gesturing proudly at Jake and his partner like they were seasoned officers instead of struggling actors in $25 uniforms. When she finally wrapped up her speech, the chief reached into his jacket, pulled out his badge, held it side by side with Jake's knockoff, and, in the most dry, deadpan voice imaginable, asked, "Ma'am, would you mind explaining to me why these gentlemen are wearing police uniforms with badges that say Police Department?" The moment was pure gold. The misspelled badge, something I'd caught earlier, now became the centerpiece of the most awkward silence Pine Valley had ever known. Jake's face cycled through a full emotional rainbow of panic, from denial to despair, as he realized their entire gig had just imploded. Then came the freight train. Rodriguez calmly announced he wasn't there to support Miranda, he was there to arrest her little costume brigade. The impact hit Miranda so hard her poise evaporated instantly. Chief Rodriguez, steady as ever, explained in detail that impersonating a police officer was a felony under state law, carrying up to 5 years in prison and fines that made Miranda's bloated HOA legal fees look like a grocery bill. Then, as if to hammer the final nail, he pulled a folded document from his jacket, a judge-signed search warrant, complete with the county seal and Judge Henderson's signature, authorizing a Pindley with the county seal and Judge Henderson's signature, authorizing a Judge Henderson's signature, authorizing a Fendleju feat, full investigation into fraud, criminal impersonation, and intimidation on Maple Street. Suddenly, Miranda's once waved manila folder looked like a child's drawing compared to an actual legal order, and her 2 fake officers started shifting nervously, eyes darting around the cabin like cornered animals realizing the exits had vanished. But Chief Rodriguez wasn't done. He had more truths to reveal, and the best was still to come, and what Chief Rodriguez said next made every so-called paranoid step my grandfather took look less like obsession and more like tactical genius. Turns out, the chief had been quietly tracking Miranda's activities for the past 8 months, working closely with the State Fraud Investigation Unit to build a comprehensive case against what they now believed was part of a larger criminal enterprise masquerading as neighborhood oversight. Miranda's little HOA dictatorship wasn't some isolated act of delusion. It was part of a pattern scheme. She had orchestrated similar stunts with at least 3 other families in Pine Valley, always using the same formula: fake police, phony inspections, and targeting vulnerable properties, especially those belonging to elderly residents or estates recently passed down to grieving families. The chief had been waiting for this exact moment, hoping Miranda would get cocky enough to show up in uniformed cosplay on someone's property, handing them the gift of undeniable evidence. Suddenly, all those months of my grandfather's odd behavior, the late-night meetings, the extra locks, the hidden cameras clicked into place. He and Chief Rodriguez had been building a trap brick by brick, waiting for Miranda to walk right into it. While the chief detailed her growing criminal resume, I quietly completed the next part of my grandfather's plan, sending a carefully curated email to Sarah Chun at Valley Independent News. Inside was everything: audio recordings from the findings from the cabin, crystal clear photos of Jake's misspelled badge, time-stamped images from the security footage, and a documented timeline of Miranda's harassment and intimidation tactics. Sarah wasn't just any reporter. She was known for taking down corrupt local officials with scalpel-like precision, and my grandfather had handpicked her months ago for the moment the truth needed to explode into daylight. Minutes after hitting send, my phone buzzed. Sarah was already en route with her crew, ready to turn Pine Valley's dirtiest secret into front-page news. Miranda's scheme to quietly pressure me into submission was about to be broadcast to the entire county. Meanwhile, the comedy show wasn't quite over. Jake and his equally panicked partner continued their crumbling act, trying to maintain their cop routine even as they stood face to face with a real police chief. Jake nervously claimed there had been a misunderstanding, that they were just following orders from proper authorities, while his buddy desperately tried to remember whatever Miranda had told him to say, flipping through mental flashcards of lies, hoping one might stick dot to hide behind my workbench like a terrified kid caught in a game of hide-and-seek gone horribly wrong. Chief Rodriguez, unfazed by their last-ditch scramble, made it crystal clear that just following orders didn't excuse criminal behavior, and that if they had any sense, they'd cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Then, in one swift move, the fake plastic cuffs dangling from their belts were replaced with cold steel ones, as both men were officially placed under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, criminal trespass, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Miranda stood frozen, watching her meticulously staged performance unravel before her eyes. Her face went from smug command to wide-eyed panic as the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. She tried to recover by reaching deeper into her bag of delusions, flailing with threats about her powerful connections in city government and her ability to make this all disappear with just a few phone calls. Waving her phone in the air like it held magical authority, she shrieked about calling the mayor, her personal attorney, and everyone who mattered to put an end to this interference in what she still insisted was official H.O.A. business. Chief Rodriguez simply smiled and advised her to start with her lawyer because she was definitely going to need one. The irony was rich and satisfying. The same woman who had spent months terrorizing families with fake citations and counterfeit legal power was now at the mercy of the real criminal justice system. And all her imaginary influence, all her barking and bluffing, couldn't buy her an inch of ground back. But just when it seemed the curtain had fallen on Miranda's act, she reached for her phone again, this time with urgent purpose, and began dialing what she clearly believed was her trump card. Whatever call she was about to make, it was obvious the next twist in this wild story was seconds away. Meanwhile, Chief Rodriguez turned to me and said it was time to open the safe, not as a casual request, but as the next calculated move-in. A long-running operation that had started with my grandfather's suspicions and was now moments away from producing its final piece of evidence. As I approached the steel box in the corner and knelt beside it, I could feel the weight of history pressing down. The old combination lock turned smoothly beneath my fingertips, its worn edges familiar after years of my grandfather's steady hands guiding mine. And as I rotated the dial to the first number, I could see the flicker of anticipation in the chief's eyes. He already knew what was coming. Numbers. My grandfather had made me memorize as a kid his wedding anniversary, my grandmother's birthday, and the day he bought this very property in 1987. As the final number clicked into place and the heavy steel door creaked open, I could practically feel the air shift. Miranda's face morphed from frantic determination to stunned horror in an instant. Whatever hope she had of salvaging her crumbling scheme evaporated the moment her eyes landed on the contents of that safe. She knew without question that something inside could dismantle everything she'd spent years fabricating. Chief Rodriguez reached in and pulled out the first item, a thick manila envelope labeled Property Survey Records, Original Copies, written in my grandfather's exacting, unmistakable handwriting. Miranda physically recoiled, stepping back like the words alone might leap off the page and expose her. My grandfather, once the official county surveyor for over 2 decades, had clearly seen something coming. He'd kept original records blueprints of Pine Valley's true layout long before updates were mysteriously made to the county archives. As Chief Rodriguez carefully spread the contents across my workbench, treating them with the reverence of courtroom evidence, the color drained from Miranda's face. Each paper told a story, and none of them matched the narrative she'd crafted. Then came the final blow, a detailed survey map clearly showing that Miranda's expansive estate, which she'd claimed as private property for the past 5 years, included 3 full acres of city-owned parkland. The original boundary markers meticulously noted on my grandfather's documents proved that in 2019, someone had physically moved the markers to extend Miranda's land by hundreds of feet, in all directions. According to the records, she'd not only fenced off a public park that had served the community since 1952, but had been illegally collecting rent from the city over $40,000 in fraudulent parking fees while actively denying residents access to public green space. Chief Rodriguez let out a low, astonished whistle as he reviewed the damning evidence, muttering something under his breath about how this had just gone from H.O.A, a harassment, to grand scale. Municipal fraud. Grandfather didn't just leave behind documents, Chief Rodriguez said quietly, his voice thick with a mix of pride and sorrow. He left behind justice in its purest form. What lay before us wasn't just evidence, it was a complete, airtight blueprint of corruption, greed, and abuse of power that stretched far beyond Miranda's petty H.O.A theatrics. The sealed envelope marked Operation Honeypot, Phase 2 turned out to be the crown jewel of it all. Inside, we found a stunning array of materials, high-resolution photographs, neatly cataloged bank records, printed email chains, and surveillance logs that traced Miranda's every move for the past 3 years. My grandfather hadn't been some eccentric old man obsessed with boundary lines. He'd been quietly running a full-scale anti-corruption sting from this very cabin. And the target wasn't just Miranda. It was an entire network of shady officials. One photo captured her slipping an envelope stuffed with cash into the hands of Deputy Clerk Russell Hayes while they sat in his car behind the county office clear. unambiguous proof of bribery. Others showed late-night meetings with zoning officials, documents changing hands in diners and parking lots, each image stamped with dates and locations. Rodriguez, visibly moved, revealed that he and my grandfather had spent the last 18 months working undercover to collect every piece of this puzzle. Operation Honeypot wasn't just a name, it was a mission, and it had been carefully planned to bring down a web of deceit that had infected our town's government for years. But they couldn't act until Miranda overplayed her hand, and today, by storming into my cabin with fake cops and fraudulent documents, she'd handed them everything they needed. As Rodriguez stood over the evidence, the weight of loss was etched deep into his features. My grandfather had pushed himself to the limit, determined to see it through. And now, even in death, he'd won. Your grandfather was one of the best men I've ever known, the chief said softly, almost more to himself than to me. And today, he got the last word. Your grandfather was the most honest man I ever knew, Chief Rodriguez said softly, the weight of his words heavy with regret. And watching criminals like Miranda thrive while he was dying, it tore him up inside. I should have moved faster. Should have found another way to get the evidence without pushing him so hard. But the real gut punch came when we uncovered a final surprise tucked beneath all the files and documents. A handwritten letter addressed to me, folded neatly like it had been waiting for the exact right moment to be read. In that familiar, slightly shaky handwriting I'd known my whole life, my grandfather had left me his final lesson, his last gift. Ethan, it began, you don't need to be the toughest guy in the room. You just need to be ready when the time comes. He wrote about how he'd trained me to document everything, to notice the little things that others missed, and above all, to trust the right people. Chief Rodriguez is one of those people, he continued. And together, you're going to finish what we started. Miranda Blackstone thinks she's the smartest one in the room. But she's about to find out that underestimating quiet people is the biggest mistake a bully can make. I read those words as Rodriguez stood beside me, and for the first time, I truly felt the full depth of what we were about to complete. Meanwhile, just a few feet away, Jake and his fellow fake officer were offering their final contribution to this absurd drama with what could only be described as the most pitiful escape attempt in Pine Valley history. The two men, in a last gasp of desperation, tried to slither under my workbench like they were starring in some D-list action flick. Rodriguez, utterly unbothered, watched the spectacle unfold with the weary patience of a man who'd seen every botched escape imaginable. You might want to try the door, gentlemen, he offered helpfully, seeing as I'm not actually blocking it. When Jake ended up wedged halfway beneath the bench, flailing like a trapped turtle, and had to be dragged out by his ankles, even Miranda, neck deep in her own downfall, couldn't hide her disgust at their hopeless incompetence. The plastic handcuffs that had once added flair to their break-in act were now replaced by cold steel restraints as Chief Rodriguez formally arrested both men on charges of criminal impersonation, unlawful entry, and conspiracy to commit fraud. It was justice, yes, but more than that, it was closure. The trap had been sprung, the evidence was airtight, and my grandfather's final mission had not only exposed the truth, but ensured that the quiet strength he'd taught me would outlast every lie Miranda had ever told. But Miranda wasn't ready to give up just yet, and the wild, unhinged look flashing in her eyes made it clear she was about to play her final, desperate card in what was quickly turning into the most catastrophic day of her spoiled, self-centered life. With a dramatic flourish, her phone flew out of her designer purse like she was brandishing a weapon in a last stand. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as they frantically scrolled through her contacts, all while she muttered about fixing this disaster and calling in favors from people who supposedly owed her everything. The smug confidence she'd flaunted earlier during her fake police stunt had completely evaporated, replaced now by a rising wave of sheer panic, the kind that only comes when someone realizes their world of privilege is crumbling beneath their feet. Clutching the phone to her ear with shaking hands, she paced across my cabin like a cornered animal, all while Chief Rodriguez looked on with the cold patience of a predator savoring the final moments before the catch. Her first frantic call was to someone she referred to as my attorney, her voice growing shrill as she demanded immediate legal help for what she dramatically claimed was a simple misunderstanding with local authorities, but the call didn't unfold the way she clearly expected. Watching her face twist through confusion, disbelief, and raw terror was more entertaining than anything you could find streaming on Netflix. Turns out, her personal attorney wasn't answering anymore, a shocking development for someone like Miranda, who'd lived her whole life surrounded by enablers and yes-men. She redialed 3 more times, each one more hysterical than the last, before finally reaching what sounded like a frazzled secretary or junior paralegal. I couldn't hear every word, but the snippets were delicious. What do you mean he's been suspended? What do you mean pending investigation? What do you mean money laundering charges? By the time she ended the call, Miranda looked like she'd been steamrolled by a truck made of bad karma and driven by poetic justice itself. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, she pulled out her final, gloriously misguided idea, launching a Facebook live stream to expose the so-called corruption of ... Miranda. In a last-ditch attempt to salvage her crumbling narrative, raised her phone high, activated the camera, and began an impassioned, breathless rant on Facebook Live, dramatically declaring that she was being persecuted for standing up to criminals and bravely defending property values in our community, a claim so absurdly ironic it felt like satire. Here was a woman who had just been caught using fake police officers to illegally seize public land, now trying to play the role of a righteous victim targeted by a corrupt system. Her theatrical monologue was so over the top that I almost pitied anyone gullible enough to fall for it. But just when I thought her public meltdown had peaked, fate dealt a glorious twist. Miranda, in her flustered fury, accidentally initiated a FaceTime call to me while still broadcasting live to her Facebook followers. And there I was, suddenly, appearing in full view on her screen, standing calmly in my cabin next to Chief Rodriguez, who at that exact moment was placing her bogus officers under arrest. It was a cinematic level of poetic justice. The timing was so impeccable it felt scripted. Her viewers were instantly thrown into confusion, flooding the comments section with brutally honest questions like, "Wait, is that the guy she's talking about? And why is he in the background if she's being harassed by him? And, best of all, Karen, this looks really bad." The internet's real-time commentary was relentless and hilarious, with people ruthlessly dismantling her version of events and pointing out the absurdity of her FaceTiming her so-called attacker mid-livestream. And just when things couldn't get worse for Miranda, they did a legitimate news crew rolled up my driveway, instantly making her iPhone stream look like a kid's YouTube vlog in comparison. Out stepped Sarah Chun from Valley Independent News, camera crew in tow, and wearing the kind of expression that told me she'd been waiting for a scoop like this to fall into her lap for months. She had received my email. Sarah Chun had arrived with all the evidence from Operation Honeypot in hand, ready to expose what was quickly unfolding as the biggest local corruption scandal Pine Valley had ever seen, and the presence of real journalists with high-grade equipment instantly reduced Miranda's fake badge routine to a pitiful, cringe-worthy sideshow. As Sarah calmly interviewed Chief Rodriguez about the arrests and charges, Miranda continued flailing on her Facebook Live, desperately trying to spin the story in her favor. But the contrast between her chaotic, self-serving meltdown and Sarah's composed, fact-based reporting was devastating. The collision of social media spectacle and serious journalism created a viral train wreck for all the wrong reasons, and her once loyal audience began turning on her in droves. I watched in astonishment as her follower count plummeted from over 5,000 to under 800 in just 20 minutes, with viewers posting brutal comments like, "This is beyond embarrassing, and how did I ever support this lunatic?" The hashtag #CatchAKRN exploded across local social media, with users flooding timelines with their own horror stories about Miranda's history of HOA tyranny and harassment campaigns. But the most crushing blow came just moments later when Chief Rodriguez took a phone call from the State Fraud Investigation Unit and dropped a bombshell that left even Miranda's dwindling livestream audience audibly gasping. The investigators had uncovered evidence tying her HOA scheme to a sprawling network of fraud impacting at least 12 other families across 3 counties, with total damages exceeding $3 million. And in a twist that made everyone's jaws drop, the FBI had officially joined the case because the scam involved interstate wire fraud, money laundering, and shell companies spanning multiple states. Miranda's petty neighborhood power play had officially escalated into a federal criminal case, and the woman who once strutted around as if she were untouchable was now learning the hard way that federal prosecutors don't give a damn about her small-town influence or designer handbags. And just when it seemed like things couldn't possibly get worse for her, as Miranda's live stream spiraled further into chaos, her viewers began recognizing some of the damning evidence that Chief Rodriguez was calmly presenting clear. Photographs of her with shady officials, forged property documents, and records of her fraudulent HOA claims, all of which confirmed what many had long suspected but couldn't prove. Victims of her earlier schemes started flooding the local news station with calls, sharing personal stories, and handing over additional evidence that Sarah Chen eagerly gathered for her fast-growing investigative series. What had begun as Miranda's desperate attempt to control the narrative had now morphed into a digital self-destruction on a national scale, a public meltdown turned confession, captured by every major outlet and preserved on the internet forever. But the final, humiliating blow came from within her own livestream audience when someone pointed out the obvious. She was FaceTiming with the very person she claimed was harassing her, all while insisting she was under attack, creating a level of cognitive dissonance even her most gullible supporters couldn't ignore. The comments section erupted with disbelief, accusations, and brutal mockery, calling her out on every contradiction until Miranda, flushed with rage and humiliation, finally ended the live stream in a flurry of frustrated defeat. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Chief Rodriguez, with a kind of calm finality, informed her that everything she had just publicly admitted, every lie, every accusation, every frantic explanation, was now official evidence in her pending federal trial. Miranda's face went pale as the horrifying realization sank in. She had essentially live-streamed her own confession to thousands of people, including agents from multiple federal agencies who were undoubtedly watching and taking notes. And yet, somehow, she wasn't done. That feral, panicked gleam returned to her eyes, an unhinged spark that suggested she was about to do something even more reckless than everything that had come before. With trembling steps, she backed into the far corner of my cabin, digging into her oversized designer purse as though it held the key to reversing her unraveling empire. When her hand emerged clutching what looked like a small black handgun, the room's energy instantly transformed from a circus of poetic justice to a frozen moment of lethal tension. Chief Rodriguez immediately dropped into full tactical mode, his hand gliding toward his sidearm, voice shifting into the calm, steady cadence that police officers use when one wrong move could mean life or death. Moment, and her muffled laughter could be heard just off camera as the absurdity of the situation broke through the tension like a needle popping a balloon. Her camera operator, still dutifully filming, had backed up far enough to be safe, but close enough to capture every glorious second of what would surely become the most widely shared clip in local news history. Jake and his equally clueless partner, who had previously been trying to sneak out the back door, now stood frozen in awe, silently processing the fact that their dramatic downfall was now officially a farce. Chief Rodriguez, to his credit, never fully dropped his professional tone, though the corner of his mouth twitched just enough to suggest he was fighting the urge to burst into laughter. "Ma'am," he repeated, ever the calm authority figure, "I'm going to need you to set the toy gun down and let's take a deep breath." Miranda stared at the bright pink water pistol in her trembling hand like it had materialized out of thin air, her eyes wide with confusion and horror. Then, as if fate was determined to drive the moment home, she accidentally squeezed the trigger, and out came a cheerful stream of water, accompanied by 3 ridiculous pew-pew-pew sound effects that echoed through the otherwise silent cabin like a punchline delivered by the universe itself. The expression that spread across Miranda's face in that instant, a mixture of disbelief, humiliation, and existential dread, was absolutely priceless. Even Sarah, a seasoned journalist trained to remain stone-faced in high-stakes situations, let out a choked laugh off camera, quickly followed by the snickering of crew members who could no longer contain themselves. What had started as the unraveling of a small-town tyrant's criminal empire had now become a surreal blend of courtroom drama and slapstick comedy, and it was all unfolding live in front of local news cameras, a baffled audience of social media followers, and several highly amused federal agents. Sarah Chun's shoulders shook with suppressed laughter as her camera kept rolling, capturing every absurd second of the Hello Kitty standoff for posterity, a surreal climax to what had already become the most bizarre criminal unraveling Pine Valley had ever witnessed. But the momentary comedy only amplified the gravity of what came next, because Chief Rodriguez, recognizing that Miranda had finally been disarmed not by force but by her own breathtaking incompetence, seized the moment he had spent months preparing for. With a calm authority and the weight of justice behind him, he stepped forward and spread a thick evidence file across my workbench like a closing argument before a jury. What followed was a jaw-dropping presentation of Operation Honeypot's true scope. Miranda's phony H.O.A. wasn't just a petty power play. It was a sprawling criminal empire that had defrauded more than 50 families across 3 counties, pulling in over $3.2 million through fabricated fees, fraudulent land seizures, and carefully orchestrated kickbacks with corrupt local officials. But what stunned us all was that this local scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation had unearthed links to an international money laundering network that used fake homeowner associations as a front to clean dirty money from drug cartels and organized crime syndicates, an operation so vast and sophisticated that it had been on the FBI's radar for over 2 years. And then came the revelation that hit me hardest. My grandfather hadn't simply stumbled upon Miranda's local con by accident. He'd unearthed a critical piece of a global criminal puzzle. Far from being a paranoid recluse in his final months, he had been secretly working as an informal consultant for federal investigators, helping them navigate the maze of forged property records and surveying data that made the entire scam possible. Chief Rodriguez's voice wavered slightly as he described how my grandfather, despite his failing health, had insisted on staying involved with the case until the very end, because he believed when good people see wrongdoing, they have a moral obligation to stand up and fight it, no matter how dangerous it might be. The most heart-wrenching moment of the entire chaotic, unbelievable day came when Chief Rodriguez opened my grandfather's final letter, the one he'd sealed in the safe as his last gift to me and a farewell message to the town he'd loved and served for decades. His voice was thick with emotion as he read, "Ethan, you don't need to be the strongest person in the room. You just need to be ready when the right moment comes." The words hit like a quiet thunderclap. "I've taught you to pay attention to details, to record everything, and to trust the people who've earned your confidence. Miranda Blackstone and people like her think they're smarter than everyone else, but they always make the same mistake. They underestimate quiet people who keep their eyes open and their principles intact." As he read on, the letter shifted from personal wisdom to a broader truth. The evidence in this case isn't just about property lines and fraud. It's about proving that ordinary citizens, when patient, cautious, and united, can stand up to corruption and win. It was a powerful, final reminder of the legacy my grandfather had left behind. Meanwhile, the emotional gravity of that moment was perfectly and hilariously offset by Jake and his partner's attempted escape, which looked less like a getaway and more like a deleted scene from a bad sitcom. Apparently unaware that Sarah Chun's camera crew was already stationed outside, the 2 grown men in fake police uniforms began army crawling across my back porch like confused escapees from a summer camp obstacle course. The footage captured was instantly iconic. Jake tangled in my grandmother's rosebush, yelling, "This was just acting. This was just a job," while cartoon sound effects and dramatic music were quickly layered over the clips by internet users, who turned the entire disaster into comedy gold. Memes spread like wildfire, with captions like "Oscar-worthy escape attempt" and "When community theater goes federal." But then came the final, jaw-dropping twist. Chief Rodriguez revealed that Miranda's arrest was only the opening move in a sweeping federal operation that would soon bring down 12 city officials, 6 shady real estate developers, and an entire web of criminals who'd been using fake homeowner associations to launder millions through shell companies and rigged property deals. What started as a bizarre neighborhood dispute had grown into a nationwide takedown of white-collar crime, and the quiet town of Pine Valley would never be the same again. The fake homeowner association Miranda had used to legitimize her fraudulent empire turned out to be just one thread in a sprawling web of deception, a front for laundering dirty money from international crime syndicates, cleverly disguised as routine real estate dealings. What began as a petty attempt to intimidate one stubborn woodworker had, through a breathtaking chain of missteps, unraveled a transnational criminal enterprise that stretched from quiet Pine Valley to offshore banking havens in 3 separate countries. And yet, Miranda had no idea that her worst nightmare was about to transform into a public celebration of everything she despised: truth, justice, and community solidarity. The aftermath of her spectacular downfall played out like the season finale of a legal drama, complete with handcuffs, federal indictments, and a town-wide celebration that would be retold in Pine Valley for generations. Chief Rodriguez officially arrested Miranda Blackstone on 47 felony charges, ranging from fraud and conspiracy to money laundering, criminal impersonation, and my personal favorite, the theft of public resources with the intent to defraud municipal government. The woman who had once ruled her neighborhood with fake legal authority now found herself facing the cold, undeniable reality of real legal consequences, up to 15 years in federal prison and a complete forfeiture of her ill-gotten fortune. As Chief Rodriguez read her rights while she still clutched that absurd Hello Kitty water gun, Sarah Chun's camera caught every glorious second, and the footage quickly became the most watched arrest video in town history, racking up more than 2.3 million views online with captions like "Karen meets karma" and "When fake authority meets federal reality." But the most gratifying twist came just 3 days later, when the FBI announced the full scope of the operation that had been blown wide open by Miranda's arrest. 12 city officials were taken into custody in synchronized dawn raids, including none other than Deputy Clerk Russell Hayes, who'd been caught on camera accepting envelopes of bribe money from Miranda in exchange for falsified property records. 6 shady real estate developers were charged with conspiracy and money laundering, and federal agents seized over $8 million in assets from offshore accounts linked to the fraudulent H.O.A. network. It turned out Miranda's pet project was just one of dozens of similar schemes operating in multiple states, all orchestrated to scrub dirty money clean through the illusion of legitimate homeownership, until one panicked woman with a toy gun and a live stream brought it all crashing down. Consequences of their actions. But it was the accidental unraveling of a criminal empire triggered by Miranda's greedy attempt to steal my grandfather's land that truly captivated the nation. Her plot had reached all the way from Pine Valley to Caribbean banking havens. But what stole the public's imagination was the quiet brilliance of my grandfather's long-game strategy, which Sarah Chun masterfully chronicled in a 5-part investigative series titled Operation Honeypot: How One Man's Final Fight Exposed a Criminal Empire. The series, which earned Sarah a regional journalism award and national acclaim, portrayed my grandfather as the kind of unsung hero people love to rally behind: a soft-spoken, principled man who used his expertise and integrity to outwit a powerful network of criminals who never saw him coming. The revelation that he had spent his final months battling not only a criminal conspiracy, but also his own deteriorating health, while building the perfect legal trap for Miranda, turned him into a folk legend. His legacy inspired a wave of similar grassroots investigations across the country, as every day people began asking questions about their own HOAs and demanding transparency. Chief Rodriguez was rightfully honored in the series as the steadfast friend and lawman who kept his promise to see justice served, and their unlikely partnership became a national model for how citizens and law enforcement can collaborate to root out corruption. The response in Pine Valley was beyond anything I could have imagined. What began as a simple celebration of reclaimed parkland soon blossomed into an annual event now known as a Justice BBQ Day, held each summer at my grandfather's beautifully restored cabin. It started small but quickly grew into a regional festival drawing families, community leaders, and curious citizens eager to hear the full story of Operation Honeypot and learn how to protect themselves from similar schemes. In a twist no one saw coming, Jake Miller, the man behind the now infamous viral escape attempt, showed up at the first Justice BBQ as a changed man, using his internet fame for good. He now runs a crowd-favorite booth called Spot the Fake Cop, where he uses humor, personal experience, and real-life examples to teach families how to recognize fraudulent authority figures and avoid being scammed. And while Miranda's trial dragged on, offering month after month of courtroom drama for anyone who took pleasure in watching arrogant bullies squirm under oath, the true legacy of her downfall was something far greater: a town united, a hero remembered, and a story that proved quiet persistence can bring even the most powerful criminals crashing down. Manipulation, intimidation, and performative authority to maintain control, only to be undone by their own arrogance and the very platforms they tried to exploit. During her trial, the courtroom was packed with observers, many of whom had followed the story from the beginning, eager to see justice formally served. Prosecutors methodically laid out the mountain of evidence collected during Operation Honeypot. Audio recordings from my grandfather's hidden devices that captured Miranda's conversations in damning detail, photographs showing her exchanging bribes with local officials, and a paper trail of falsified property documents used to unlawfully seize public land. But the most devastating blow came from her own hand, her infamous live stream, where she accidentally confessed to multiple crimes while trying to paint herself as the victim. The defense's feeble attempt to frame her as a well-meaning but misguided community leader manipulated by others fell apart completely when the FBI revealed surveillance and financial records proving that she had orchestrated every aspect of the scheme herself. The jury didn't need long less than 3 hours to return a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Henderson delivered a sentence that echoed the public's demand for accountability: 15 years in federal prison, plus full restitution, effectively ensuring Miranda would spend the rest of her life stripped of every asset she had acquired through deception. In the months that followed, my grandfather's cabin, once the quiet retreat of a private man with a fierce sense of justice, was transformed into a living testament to civic responsibility. It became a small but powerful museum dedicated to exposing and fighting local corruption, drawing in civic groups, journalism students, and law enforcement trainees from across the region. The walls are lined with original Operation Honeypot documents, including my grandfather's handwritten notes and surveillance photos, each piece telling a story of methodical resistance and moral clarity. Chief Rodriguez, now the honorary curator, regularly gives talks about the power of community partnerships, always reminding visitors that lasting change doesn't require superpowers, just sharp eyes, careful documentation, and the courage to speak up. The cabin also houses a growing archive of testimonials from families nationwide who successfully fought back against HOA scams, turning it into a vital resource for recognizing and resisting abuse in local governance. Perhaps the most unexpected legacy of all was the evolution of #CatchAKR from a local joke into a national movement. Once just a hashtag, it has become a cultural rallying cry against performative authority and unchecked entitlement. It now adorns t-shirts, bumper stickers, and protest signs, empowering ordinary people to challenge abusive behavior and expose those who misuse power for personal gain. Miranda's spectacular collapse didn't just close a chapter, it opened a nationwide conversation about accountability, digital evidence, and the quiet power of people who refuse to back down. Miranda Blackstone's reign of intimidation and false authority ended not with a grand show of power, but with the soft, absurd click of a Hello Kitty water gun, an object so hilariously symbolic of her unraveling that it now sits behind glass in the museum at my grandfather's cabin, donated by her own granddaughter. Alongside it is a handwritten note, a touching message that says she's glad her toy helped bring a bad person to justice. That single artifact has become a quiet monument to irony and to the idea that even the smallest tools can play a role in dismantling corruption when they end up in the right hands. The most fulfilling part of this entire journey has been witnessing how my grandfather's legacy continues to ripple outward, inspiring everyday people to take a stand against injustice in their own neighborhoods. His belief that you don't have to be the strongest person in the room, only the one who's ready when the time comes, has become a guiding light for activists, civic leaders, and ordinary folks who've grown tired of being pushed around by people hiding behind fake authority. Miranda thought she could scare a quiet woodworker into giving up his family's land. But what she walked into was a meticulous trap 2 years in the making, crafted by a man who knew that real power comes not from shouting the loudest, but from knowing when to act. Justice doesn't always arrive swiftly, but when it comes, it hits with the full weight of every lie, every fraud, and every intimidation tactic used to keep others silent. The last time I saw Miranda was at her sentencing, and gone was the smug confidence, the entitled glare. In its place was a small, frightened woman in an orange jumpsuit, begging the court she once tried to manipulate for mercy she never gave to anyone else. As I watched her being led away in real handcuffs to begin a 15-year sentence, my thoughts returned to my grandfather's final words, that quiet people who keep their eyes open and their values strong can truly change the world. We've all felt that helpless fury when someone with unearned power tries to make us feel small, whether it's a corrupt boss, a crooked official, or a neighbor who thinks they're above the rules. But this story is proof that quiet preparation, careful documentation, and patient courage can bring even the most arrogant abuser crashing down. If you're facing that kind of injustice, remember, your voice matters more than you think. Your evidence counts, and justice is possible, especially when you know the right steps to take. If you're ready for more true stories where everyday people take on powerful forces and win, go ahead and gently tap that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to join the Happer Stories family. Together, we're building a community That proves you don't need a badge or a title to stand up for what's right, just clarity, courage, and the will to act. Thanks for sticking with us through another wild ride where the rules are fake, the drama is real, and karma always finds its way. And hey, if this story reminded you of a nosy neighbor with binoculars and way too much time on their hands, trust me, you're not alone. Smash that like button like it's a forged HOA notice on your front door, and remember, this is your letter to stay spicy. Stay sharp and stay ready, because justice doesn't knock. It kicks the door down